It was a joke to my colleague at the time, and it's still a joke now. On this table over here, and I can go grab them real quick and pull it out, this is the news release that actually came from Burbank PD. So Burbank PD is the one that actually tipped us off to this group coming to Arizona. They, sounds like from their news release, have some information and cases that they're going to likely be forwarding to the Los Angeles County District Attorney. So that might be a resource for your news teams to kind of vet out with their PIO. So that's about as much information as we're going to share on that for what we're going to talk about. But I wanted to make sure that those that wanted that resource have that there. And yeah, in a few minutes we'll kind of get everything going. Does anybody else need any lighting or sound or anything else? Oh, maybe we do. Hi.
Go on ahead, start.
No, you're good. We got at least 7 minutes. Or 6.5. There is not, sorry. But there is plenty of real estate on this mic stand still.
Okay.
If that helps. All right, we're supposed to start. If everyone could just please take a moment to double and triple check your phones and devices, and please silence anything. At the ceremony yesterday, I said, if you really want to be the center of attention, I will find a speaking role for you. But that's not what we're here about today. So. Thank you. All right, if we think we're all ready to get started, I think our team is ready to go. Everybody okay? ABC 15, we're good? Good. Yep, good. Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. And my name is Aaron Bolin, and I'm one of the public information officers for Scottsdale PD. Spelling on the name is AARONBOLIN, and rank is officer. I'm joined today by Assistant Police Chief Chris Watson, and that is CHRISWATSON, and Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell. Spelling is RACHELMITCHELL. And we're here to talk today about a really phenomenal case and some arrests that were made Friday afternoon in Scottsdale related to a group of 7 individuals who came to the Scottsdale community for the purpose of committing burglaries in neighboring communities and around Maricopa County. I want to briefly go over our itinerary for this morning so you all kind of know what to expect and what's going to be coming up next. Also to remind everybody that Burbank Police did provide a news release on May 27th, and that document is available over at the table over there. And any further information not provided in this news conference can be obtained from Burbank PD's PIO group. In a moment, I will invite Assistant Chief Chris Watson up to speak in generalities over the case. He is the chief over our detective bureaus, which obviously played a huge role in locating and eventually arresting this group of 7 people. After he's done speaking, I will come back up and give it just a little bit more in-depth review, talk mostly to what we talked about or what was mentioned in the news release, add a few other details and some things that we've learned since the arrests on Friday. And then after that, I'll invite up Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell to talk about her office's involvement in this case and where we sort of stand today with our group of 7. Once she's done speaking to that part, we'd like to have, if there are any questions related to what her office's involvement is, happen at that time. That way she's kind of up here one time for that, and then I will come up at the very end and I can answer some other questions potentially about the investigation if they're not answered through the rest of the news conference. So that's going to be the general flow of it. Again, I'll get out of the way here in a minute. Assistant Chief Watson will be up here. I'll come back up, give a more detailed summary of the events that led to the arrests. Then County Attorney Rachel Mitchell will be up here, talk about her office involvement, answer some questions specific to that, and then I will come up at the end and then, again, answer hopefully any other questions that might be here. Looking to get us done as quickly as possible, but we want to make sure that we can answer as many of your questions as you might have. With that, I'd like to welcome up to the podium Assistant Police Chief Chris Watson.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us this morning. I want to start by saying how truly grateful I am to work in Scottsdale and to live in what I think is the greatest state in the United States of Arizona. It's important for me that as we begin these conversations, we delineate between the millions of visitors that we have that come to Arizona each year for the reasons that we love this state so much, for the right reasons and in the right ways, that we delineate between that group and groups such as these 7 Colombian nationals who came to the United States to commit crimes and who came to Arizona to victimize our community for their own benefit. This work was a result of collaboration and communication between many law enforcement agencies, not just here locally in Arizona, but throughout the nation. And it really began with the Burbank Police Department. I want to thank them for their investigation, the work they put in ahead of time, and their communication in a timely manner to the Scottsdale Police Department. They really gave us the opportunity to bring in all our resources, to have all hands on deck to ensure a proper response to this group. I also want to thank the Maricopa County Attorney's Office and County Attorney Rachel Mitchell, Tom Van Dorn, their entire team for their commitment, their dedication to holding these types of criminals accountable, and all criminals accountable, and the message that it sends to crime tourists who are coming to Arizona to commit these types of crimes. For us, this investigation began last Tuesday, May 20th, when we received that information from Burbank Police Department that this group was on their way to Scottsdale and believed to be coming here to commit crimes. This investigation on our side was led by our property crimes section, the Sergeant Paul Wright, Sergeant Gary Thornton, and our Special Assignments Unit and Tech Unit. They really did the brunt of the work on our side. And I want to speak on some generalities. With these types of cases, these are very complex and take a lot of resources from the police department. When we get this type of information, all things are dropped. And I want to just give some kudos to our officers, our detectives, the men and women of the Scottsdale Police Department who sacrifice dinners with family, end of the year school celebrations, adjust vacation dates to ensure safety of our community. So this group of 7 individuals were working very cohesively together to commit these crimes. And it was 4 days of continuous surveillance and observation of this group. That said, these groups employ tactics such as having fluid roles with each individual in the group. These types of groups will often have counter surveillance, will have scouts, things like that. So conducting surveillance is a very difficult task. So you may have questions towards the end regarding timing of different things, but keep that in mind as we talk through some of the details of this case, this investigation, and how it really came to fruition on Friday the 23rd. After 4 days of surveillance, we did confirm that 2 burglaries had taken place here in the valley, one in Tempe and one in Mesa from this group. They would employ tactics, even using a small French bulldog to walk around neighborhoods and blend in. So those are the kind of things we were combating throughout. Once we were able to confirm those burglaries occurred, we worked towards an apprehension. That said, this group and these types of groups have often been known to evade police, to be a flight risk. And for us, it was very important to ensure that all 7 of these individuals were apprehended and held accountable for their actions. That led to our special assignments, our SWAT team, being very patient, strategic, in coordinating efforts into apprehending all 7 of these suspects. That took place after a search warrant was executed at the short-term rental they were staying at here in Scottsdale. That was done very safely, very professionally, with the minimal amount of force needed to effect those arrests. And so for that, I'm very thankful for the efforts that you all put in to make that happen. Once we did that, we were able to bring closure to a lot of these victims, return property for some of our victims here locally, as well as locate property of victims in various other states. That included the French bulldog that they were walking around. That dog was confirmed to be stolen in a case out of California. So while a lot of these victims were given closure, whether it's property, whether it's knowing that those who victimized them were now in custody, this family will be reunited with their family pet, with a member of their family coming up very soon. So I'm very thankful for, again, the collaboration, the effort, not just from our county attorney here, but for all those involved in the case. And with that, I'm going to turn it over back to Officer Boland for some of the details of last week.
Thank you, Chief. Well, the Scottsdale Police Department received notification from the Burbank Police Department back on May 20th. And the information was that this group of 7 was inbound to Arizona. And what Burbank was really allowed to help provide that really helped our investigators locate them so quickly was vehicle description and probable license plates that they had on the vehicles at the time. Through investigative means, our detectives were able to then locate those vehicles at a short-term rental in Scottsdale near Camelback Road and Miller Roads, and then start to set up surveillance. And when I tried to ask our investigative team how much surveillance, I was told a lot. It was a lot. And as Chief Watson pointed out, it took many, many hours. When you're dealing with crew of 7 people, 2 different vehicles, they already have counterintelligence and counter surveillance set up. Our surveillance needs to be even better and even more covert. And so we employ lots of different technology for that. I know in the Form 4 document, it did talk about the use of drones. That was part of the technology that we levered in this case in different times and locations as we were doing surveillance on this group. From the 20th until the 23rd, much of what this group didn't rise to the level of anything that was overly concerning to the detectives. But as the afternoon of May 23rd unfolded, they took off and headed for some different neighborhoods in different parts of the valley. And that created some challenges, obviously, for the surveillance team, because now you have this group that's now mobile. They're not just staying at one place anymore, potentially doing illegal activity. They're using the freeways. They're going through neighborhoods. They're doing different things to see if investigators are actually following them or if they are being followed. And so our team had to be even more careful to make sure that they did this right so that they could keep an eye on these people to see what they were going to do next. When our detectives caught up with them in a neighborhood in Tempe, there was some suspicious activity going on. And as Assistant Chief Watson pointed out, each member of this group of 7 had a role. Either it was a lookout role, a getaway driver role. One of them was actually even in disguise as possibly a food delivery driver to go up and knock on the door to see if anybody would answer. And so they were doing a lot of work ahead of time, being pretty smart to try to see if the home was occupied or not, to see if they got a response from the home. And then they would do things like look over the neighboring walls and things. And while some of that behavior may seem inherently suspicious, it is, it's not necessarily enough to necessarily arrest anybody just yet. And so what ended up happening is that vehicles started to move around. There was even more activity around this house in Tempe, and then the vehicles basically took off. And from that, our detectives were then able to go and find out that that home in Tempe had indeed been broken into. So now we had a crime that could be actionable. But first, we need to actually contact the victim to see if the victim is willing to aid in prosecution. So those efforts were done, investigated. We found out what was stolen from that home in Tempe. Meanwhile, doing that, this group of 7 left. They didn't hang around. They didn't go back to the short-term rental. They actually went to another neighborhood, this time in Mesa, and did much of the same activity. They had one of the lookouts that was walking the dog. They had the person that was on the electric scooter going up and down the road, looking for other activity, just being good lookouts. And they also had communication ability. They actually had AirPods and things in. They were communicating actively with each other about things that they saw because obviously they don't want to get caught doing what they're doing. Well, there ended up being a second burglary in Mesa. We were able to confirm that, do the investigation, take the report. And in both these cases, both in Tempe and both in Mesa, we knew that we were on this group from the beginning. So our detectives stepped up. We're all state-certified police officers, state-certified detectives. We can take reports in other jurisdictions. We took those reports for those victims, contacted those victims, and took that upon our department to do based on our level of activity, obviously, to that point. And that's what we did. And obviously the goal there is to make sure that we're doing accurate and thorough reporting, making sure that we're documenting things that were taken for the home, in hopes of then being able to recover that property for those victims. When we talk about a little bit of timing is important. We already knew that this group of 7 was staying at this short-term rental. We knew that when they left different places to go check out other neighborhoods or drive other places, they would take both vehicles typically and go in sometimes different directions. Again, that's dividing now our resources and our surveillance team a little bit. So things get a little tricky. We also know that these groups tend to flee from law enforcement at the moment of first contact. So had there been a chance to try to do a traffic stop or any of those things, they could have fled. The advantage we had was we knew where they were staying. We knew where they were eventually going to land. And that was part of the plan going forward then. Once we had crimes that we knew occurred, once we had victims we knew were willing to prosecute, we then started to then formulate that plan for apprehension. And to that point, on May 23rd, around 4 p.m., detectives and Scottsdale Police SWAT and Special Assignments Unit and tech personnel served the search warrant at the short-term rental property the suspects were staying at. Because of that patience and because of that effort, we didn't have any situation where any of this group of 7 was able to escape from that residence or to flee or to get in one of the vehicles and cause a pursuit to happen or anything else that could be potentially dangerous for the rest of the community. All 7 suspects were then booked into the Maricopa County Jail. They do face numerous criminal charges, and all of them initially had held on a $150,000 cash-only bond. And that's pretty tremendous when, being that their passport said they were Colombian nationals, we didn't have any other prior convictions or arrest history on them to go by making those decisions. A bond amount that high really says a lot about how serious that the county attorney's office takes crimes like this. I just want to close out for right now by saying, again, this is an excellent example of the great relationships we do have with other agencies in the Valley, in the nation. This kind of information sharing, this kind of intelligence sharing means so much when we can get connected and get tips on different crews like this and then make the arrests and help solve the crimes and help restore families and help basically bring justice for these victims. These investigations can be complicated. They're very, very fluid. Things happen fast. Again, while one set of detectives that was part of their surveillance was taking care of the Tempe address, this group is already on to the Mesa one. And so things are very fluid. Things happen very, very fast. But because of our efforts and because of the collaboration we had, we were actually able to then eventually arrest all 7 where they landed at that short-term rental. And yes, the French bulldog was recovered, no longer is being employed as a potential lookout with this crew, and will be reunited with their family hopefully at the end of this week. I'd like to go ahead and invite up Maricopa County Attorney Rachel Mitchell to talk about her office involvement. She can then answer any questions about her office involvement, and then from there I'll come back up and try to answer any further questions you all might have about the investigation. County Attorney Rachel Mitchell.
Thank you. Good morning, and I want to extend a thank you to Scottsdale Police Department for involving us in this case. One thing that the Scottsdale Police Department and the Maricopa County Attorney's Office have in common is that we want to send a very strong message to individuals, whether they come from outside the United States or from within the United States, that crime is not going to be tolerated. And the amount of resources that, Chief, that you put into this investigation is extraordinary, and the citizens of Scottsdale as well as Tempe and Mesa should be very grateful to you. I want to touch a little bit about the $150,000 cash bond. As many of you know, when I took office, there was a tendency to give bonds that were secured appearance bonds. In other words, the person would only have to post 10% and collateralize the remaining amount. So this is extraordinary that we have now gotten a $150,000 cash-only bond, meaning $150,000 has to be put up for these individuals to bond out. That's on all of the 7 defendants. But there's something that is concerning to me that I need to point out, and that is the very outdated matrix for bond recommendations from pretrial services that our courts rely on. Under that matrix, the score showed that each of these individuals should have been released on their own recognizance or with no bond whatsoever. These are individuals who not only have no real ties to our community, but they have no ties to our country except to come here to commit crimes. And so one of the things that I'm going to be doing is using this case as an example to the courts of a need to update the scoring mechanism for the initial appearance court so that bonds are appropriate and take into account this type of crime. Yes, it was not violent in the sense of it wasn't person on person, but to have individuals come here from another country specifically for the purpose of committing crimes in our community absolutely should warrant more than an OR bond. And so I want to give a shout out to the attorneys in my office that went before the court, made the arguments provided by Scottsdale Police Department, and were able to have the court order a $150,000 cash-only bond. I can't talk much about the case beyond that. Obviously, we're very early in the very early stages of this case, but our office takes these very seriously. We want to send a very strong message that Maricopa County, Scottsdale, Tempe, Mesa are not places that you want to come to commit crimes. And if you do come here from other states or other countries, plan to stay. We're going to keep you in on bond, and we're going to punish you with prison or jail. So with that, I'll answer any questions that I can at this point.
County Attorney Richard Mitchell, is there not a pretrial services officer who can amend that matrix at all, or is it strictly apply this, and you're out on your own recognizance?
As I have seen it, it's pretty much a checklist and a scoring system, and it does not take into account factors that you see here, that I see here, that would call for more than OR release.
And this is a contributing factor of this that they don't technically have any prior criminal record here in the States? Is that a part of it? That
is a part of it, and obviously they may or may not have a criminal record. We may not have access to that. Certainly, people have to be receive their initial appearance within 24 hours of their arrest, and so that is not adequate time for us to even research, especially if it's out of country.
Court documents show that one of the suspects had immigration charges. Are there any immigration holds or proceedings on the suspects going forward? Could there be deportations, or would they be incarcerated here?
Obviously, that's a federal issue, but my understanding is that there is an ICE file stop on each of the individuals. All right, thank you.
Thank you, County Attorney Mitchell, for being here, and thank you for that. Really appreciate it. Again, just highlights some of the great partnerships that we do have. And when I was trying to explain some of this case I was working on throughout the weekend, it really kind of reminded me of like sort of the next Hollywood blockbuster movie, right? You got international burglars coming to a tourist destination. You have a dedicated police force not willing to let their community be victimized, and a strong county attorney who is willing to hold these people accountable. And then you got the dog. I mean, you got the dog in there, and that pulls a lot of heartstrings too. But really just excellent work. And I'm back up here, obviously, again, like I promised, to try to answer any further questions about the investigation that I can. Also, maybe clarify any points of fact that anybody has any questions on, or any of that. So please, I'd love to answer some. Yes?
Yeah. Is there anything other homeowners in the valley can do to protect their homes from this kind of activity? I should also ask, is there anything in any sort of interviews that these defendants said to you all that they were using as a way to target homes? Is there anything that stood out to them to say this is the one we want to target?
I'm not aware of any intelligence that they had necessarily on what they were specifically looking for, but there are some commonalities. One of the commonalities was this group was the time of day they were hitting. They were hitting during a time of day that most people are typically gone to work or gone to school. So kind of midday was when they were usually trying to hit. One of the other things that they were doing is actually then posing as a food delivery or some other type of delivery to check to see if anybody came to the door, if anybody was home. I think we all try to do everything that we can to protect our homes and to protect our valuables and our family members inside. So obviously there's things that you can do to make your home a harder target. You can put on metal screen doors. You can potentially put metal screening on your windows or bars on the windows. That aren't always maybe feasible, but one of the things that's actually totally free you can do if you have a good neighborhood is you don't even have to have a formal neighborhood watch, but if you have some kind of relationship with your neighbors, and if you see something that looks out of place at your neighbor's house, is to go ahead and call. A lot of times people feel that, well, I don't want to bother the police department with something that might be nothing. Well, let us figure that out. That's part of what we get paid for, is to go and see if suspicious behavior is nothing or if it maybe is something. And so we would encourage people to, again, if you see something, say something. Call your neighbor. Say, hey, there's someone poking around your house that doesn't look like they belong there, if you know them that well. Hopefully, maybe most of us do. But you can always call the police department and also say, hey, look, I'm seeing someone that's around my neighbor's house, or I'm seeing someone on my Ring camera that I don't recognize and shouldn't be there. And you know, the previous crew that we had back last spring of 2024, they were actually using Wi-Fi jammers to basically circumvent most people's what now are their camera systems or alarm systems that use Wi-Fi. Back then we were advocating that people try to use hardwired systems if they can, just because those are harder to defeat. But again, everyone has their own financial considerations and things they need to be concerned with. One of the other things that these groups typically try to do is they know most of us keep our valuables in our primary bedroom and our primary bathroom area. They're also looking for things they can easily steal. So loose jewelry, loose cash, loose items. In this case, some of the items they stole were clothing items, some expensive shoes, things like that. I mean, we're not suggesting everybody lock everything up. That's not reasonable either. But try to make some of those things, if you can, just maybe less visible in your home as well. That way, if unfortunately someone does break in, they can't just immediately see it and grab it. Because these folks are looking for things they can easily turn back around and sell.
What were the state of these homes when you guys entered the one in, the one in Tempe, the one in Mesa? Said maybe in the Form 4 there was just appeared to be a lack of a disregard for people's valuables. What were the state of those homes in?
Yeah, according to the court documents that I reviewed, they basically characterized them as being ransacked, and so everything was kind of overturned, including mattresses, some drawers, and some other things. And that's not the way that I remember things being characterized in some of the other sort of South American theft groups we've had. But I think it's also important to note that the group that we arrested in spring of 2024 is completely separate from this group. They do some common things or some similar things. They like to go into empty homes. They like to go right where they think the most valuable items are going to be, and some of those things. But yeah, in this case particular, it seemed like there was a lot of disrespect and disregard for people's property. Obviously, they were there to steal things anyway, so they didn't have any respect for anybody. We also want the community to know and everybody to know that these burglars are really not wanting to encounter anybody. When they were arrested and during the searches of the vehicles and the searches of the homes, we didn't find any weapons, and we have no reason to believe that they were going to be violent with anybody. In the past, these types of groups typically, when they've been encountered by a homeowner, they typically turn around and run and try to get the heck out of there as fast as they can. So we're not saying that they're not dangerous, but we are saying that most of the time they're not looking for an encounter with somebody. Going back to some crime prevention ideas, you know, something that you could do. You don't want to go to the door because you think it might be a solicitor, but at least answer the door and through the door and just say, hi, I'm home, but I don't want anything that you're selling. And at least that would tell somebody that you're there. Yeah.
Are they evolving, these groups? Are they getting better? Are they learning from each other?
Yeah, that's really hard to kind of know if they're necessarily evolving, but I think different groups and different folks, just like we all have a different style of ways that we do things in our own lives that work for us. I think some of these groups just find ways that work for them. The group that we arrested in March of 2024, we arrested 3 people. This is a group of 7. So again, with 7 people, you have additional resources. You can have someone that has a dog prop to basically go walk a dog and act as a lookout. You then have other people that can ride an electric scooter or to be posted up around a residence just to be an extra set of eyes and ears. And so I think with more people, they just had more resources to kind of lean on to do their own counter surveillance. And that was, again, one of the challenges that our teams had to make sure that we were able to stay covert during our surveillance operations, was to make sure we didn't get spotted by those extra set of eyes. But again, there's a lot of commonality here, kind of middle of the day, looking for empty homes, going right to where they think the most valuables are going to be, and basically looking for things that are untraceable. So loose jewelry, loose cash, and some of those types of things is what they're usually looking for.
Can you explain why they weren't apprehended? You said they were surveilled for about 3 days or so. Why weren't they apprehended as suspects in California earlier, and does it have anything to do with the relatively light probation sentences of 2 of the theft gang members that you arrested last year?
Well, part of the decision for not arresting them immediately when they landed in Arizona is because when Burbank PD notified us that they could be en route to Arizona and potentially to Scottsdale, we didn't have any information at that time that there was probable cause to arrest them or hold them for a different agency. They were definitely being investigated in those other jurisdictions for similar activity, but our group was not immediately aware of any probable cause that we could have arrested them for as they landed in Arizona, essentially. And so it was really important then that we made sure that we kept eyes on them the entire time, and then if we did detect criminal activity we could act upon, that we did so in an expedient amount of time. It's also important to know that when our detectives work surveillance on these cases, these are property crimes. Again, we know these groups typically aren't out to hurt anybody. However, our detectives are close enough that if they detected any kind of violent crime or any kind of danger to a community member was happening, that they would immediately step in and immediately stop any of that from happening. We're not going to sit back and have a violent crime occur. And again, it's not so much that we are watching and knowing every move they make ahead of time. We don't have that sort of precog ability to be able to know what they're going to do. We're almost always reacting or responding to things that they have done. And so making sure that we confirm those were burglaries was important. It might seem silly, but there are times where if we don't have confirmation from a victim that they don't know these people and that the victim wants to aid in prosecution, that the suspect could potentially turn around and say, well, this is my buddy's house and I don't have my key and I was on the phone with them and they said I could break into their house. It might sound outlandish, but those types of things can happen. And so it is important as investigators that we do a thorough investigation and make sure a crime has occurred, that we have willing participants as far as the victims go, and then that way that gives us that probable cause to make those arrests and then to help hold them accountable. Did I answer your question on that?
That does, and if you want to comment on the second part of, and maybe County Attorney Mitchell would like to comment on the relatively light probation sentences of the two adults taken into custody last spring that you referenced on the similar theft gang.
Yeah, I personally don't have any comment from the police department on that part. That's not something that's within our sort of wheelhouse to comment on. I don't know if County Attorney Mitchell would like to come back up. It's up to you.
Just briefly.
Sure, okay.
Yeah, that's a frustration I have as well, because burglary without any criminal history, and again, we've talked about the problems with securing anybody's criminal history when they're not from this country, is probation eligible, even after trial. And so there's a limited amount that we can do. In this situation, we have 2 burglaries, so there may be some other charges, as people have alluded to, in other jurisdictions as well.
Thank you. Okay, yes.
Can you talk about the prevalence of SATGs in Arizona? How common is it to find these groups operating? And along with that, some of the groups are very organized with their counter surveillance, their technology. Where are they getting that organized training for this crime? Is it coming from, home command in their home country, or how are they learning that?
I don't know that we have enough time to talk about all that here. And I do know that some of our investigators and investigative supervisors are very well versed in all that. So what I can touch on as far as the prevalency part of that is, back going to 2023 into 2024, there were approximately 160 cases across the valley. I think Scottsdale had close to about 40 of those, or 39 of those at the time. And we ended up arresting 3. That stopped the cases occurring in Scottsdale at the time, but that's not to say that those 3 were directly responsible for all 39 of those cases in Scottsdale. We do know that these folks, if they have a passport or a travel visa or whatever it is that allows them to get into this country, that they can do that. And again, many people, more than the criminals, use that to come to our country to visit, to see the Grand Canyon or go to Disneyland and all those other things. But some people are here to commit crimes. And so if you go back to 2023, 2024, a bigger amount of cases going on. And that really put a lot of national spotlight, I believe, and Valley spotlight on this type of activity at that point. a lot of effort went into making those arrests and getting those people. We had some here. We had 3 here. I believe Phoenix and Paradise Valley had a few in their agency that were related to some of their crimes in their agencies as well. Then we go for a relative long period of time where we don't have any South American theft group confirmed cases. And had this group not been taken off when they were taken off and arrested on May 23rd, they could have been looking to victimize homes in Scottsdale. It just so happened that wherever they were looking took them to Tempe and Mesa on that day. And so prevalency-wise, again, we had a pretty good gap where, at least in Scottsdale, we didn't really see any of that activity. So I don't want to speak to other jurisdictions so much. But with this particular group of 7, we do have information coming through Burbank PD that this group was potentially active both in Washington and Oregon and California before arriving here. And so I don't think it's safe for anyone to say that this is over or we should never worry about South American theft groups again. I think we will see different time periods where they're more active than not, but thankfully we do have a good network of communication with other national agencies, other valley agencies. When we start to notice these trends or start to notice it, we're communicating so much better to share that information to hopefully get it stopped as quickly as possible.
Did you have any information on how they chose these 2 areas? Did they go look out ahead of time and then the day of they did another scope, or was it just we'll head here and see what happens kind of thing?
If I remember, and not too specific, but if I remember a little bit from the court documents that were shared or available, that they were actually seen casing another neighborhood actually before they settled in Tempe and Mesa this day. And so again, with that group of 7, it sounds like they had a pretty sophisticated organization amongst that group where they were even scouting ahead, maybe even looking for things a day or 2 ahead or a week or 2 ahead of maybe their planned activity. But as far as exactly what's directing them toward Tempe that day and Mesa that day, I don't have that information immediately available. But it's this group was pretty well organized, and it looked like they were really keeping track and again, doing that scouting activity, that casing activity, as we would call it in the police world. But yeah, that's something that this group did.
Is there any indication, until you first got eyes on them and were able to begin your surveillance, is there any indication or that they may have hit other houses before you guys found them, or did you pretty much find them as they hit town kind of thing?
From what I understand from our investigators, it sounds like we pretty much were on them as soon as they landed within a little bit of time. Obviously, using some technical and investigative means that we don't want to talk about right now. But to locate the vehicles with the suspected plates at a short-term rental took a little bit of time from the notification from Burbank, but our folks were on it pretty quick to get eyes on them as quick as possible.
Could the owner of that
That
short-term
teamwork between states is invaluable. I mean, they probably could have come here and done their own investigation, but to open up and say, hey, this is what we're doing, that communication is invaluable.
The communication is totally invaluable. Police officers in each state are typically certified for their state, so their arrest powers essentially would maybe end at their state line. But we would always work with another agency that if they wanted to take the full case on themselves, we would help them through that. But it was wonderful that they were able to pass that information on to us, and that we were then able to take the appropriate action on it once we knew that we had crimes committed. I think we had a question over here.
Yeah. Could the owner of that short-term rental property in Scottsdale be facing any sort of crime or citation for renting to people with non-resident status, likely no form of valid identification? Is that a crime to your knowledge or something that's being looked into?
It's definitely being looked into. In Scottsdale, we actually do have a short-term rental unit, so we do have officers that are basically assigned to that as sort of a specialty assignment, and they will work within our property detectives to kind of look at that angle a little bit, because that is a very valid question, is how were they able to rent this property? We know that they had Colombian passports, and their Colombian passports were matched up with them to identify them as who they are. And that was all verified through, I believe, HSI and through ICE ultimately. But we did find other identification items with them that may or may not be fraudulent in one way or another. They may have been used fraudulently, but they belong to a real person, or they were created to be fraudulent to represent the person that's one of the suspects. So that's something we'll look into. Sometimes those short-term rental agreements and things, sometimes they're civil, and there may not be any criminal action that might be able to take place on it. But that's something that I know our detectives are looking into with our short-term rental unit, and to see if there's anything that should, could, or needs to be done on that.
Could be provided harder to a documented.
It could be, but you gotta look at the intent.
Yeah.
And did they know, and did they have any reason to know that they were doing it? Or did these suspects just misrepresent themselves and it looked good enough and that was it? So yeah, that's something that, through the next couple of days and weeks might be looked at. But again, we're glad that we actually got these people in hand for what they were here to do, which was to victimize people and steal their property. So.
And can you also explain why the suspects weren't arrested at the Tempe and Mesa homes?
Yeah.
Being observed, I believe.
Right. So when the surveillance happens and you read it, it's kind of easy to think and to say to yourself, well, why don't they just do it then? But what we know about these groups is that when a police car gets behind them or the police lights start to come on, they're going to flee and potentially even cause a pursuit. Well, pursuing basically people who've committed a property crime is potentially dangerous. That's a risky thing to do because a lot of pursuits end up either hurting other people, they end up in some type of collision or some type of other thing. The benefit we had was we knew where they were going to land. We knew ultimately where they were staying and that we were going to be able to collect them all basically at one time. Part of the other consideration for that was that they had 2 different vehicles they were using. So even though we were trying to keep covert and fluid surveillance on them, we were kind of concerned that if we started to light up one vehicle, one other vehicle could get away. Then you could have the chance that maybe there's not that much of a pursuit. They stop, they dump out, they start running into a neighborhood, and then there's other problems that you might have for that. So because we had reason to believe at the time that these individuals were not committing any kind of violent crime, that allowed us to make some better decisions and slow things down a little bit, again, knowing that we knew where they were staying and living at the time. Knowing that their propensity to run once contacted by law enforcement after doing something was also a consideration. And then just making sure that we set ourselves up successfully to apprehend them basically all at once so that we didn't have anybody fleeing or leaving, jumping into other people's backyards, causing any other type of sort of crisis or problem for a different neighborhood. So that was some of the considerations we did. We also had to make sure, again, that we had a valid crime. And so it took some time to get a hold of the victims and make sure that they weren't expecting anybody at their home, didn't give anybody permission to break into their home and take any of their things. And so some of those things take a little bit of time. And then while that's happening at the Tempe residence and we're verifying those facts of the case and that there's a crime and there's a victim willing to prosecute, well, they're already on their way to Mesa. And so now we have our team divided up surveillance-wise to see where they're going and keep eyes on them. And all this is happening very, very fluidly. So again, sometimes when you read it, it might seem like, well, why didn't they? They should have and all that. When things are happening in real time and you're trying to make sure you're doing things as safely as possible with all this, it takes time, and there's a lot of conversations that happen on radios about how careful we're going to be and our plan for this to make sure that we do gather them and get them all at once, particularly once that we know they're going to land back at that short-term rental.
Can I ask one more question to the county attorney if possible? If there's evidence that links this group to other crimes in other states and the federal prosecutors want to get involved, is that something that you would support?
We work with the U.S. Attorney's Office quite frequently, and so if they want to get involved, obviously they can do that. At this point, I don't have information other than this is a state crime, but and I do need to say, obviously, charges are not evidence of guilt, and they need to be proven guilty in a court of law. But we routinely work with other agencies, including prosecution agencies.
Thank you. We have a few more moments. I just want to make sure there were some other things that had come up through some discussions and from social media a little bit. Questions on legal status. ICE has been notified, again, as we've already stated. They had Colombian passports. We don't actually know how they entered the U.S. at this point in time, but we do know they have no known ties to Arizona or to the United States. Their passports would be available back to them at this point if and when they are released from custody. If they do post bond, and actually they are still, at last check this morning, they are actually still, all 7 of them are still in custody. If they were to post that cash-only bond, then they would be subject to electronic monitoring and then also have to surrender their passports. So that's some other information and other things that people had asked. I think we talked about, another question was, were they armed or not? We don't have any information that supports that they were armed during any of their crimes. And again, once they were arrested and we searched them, searched the vehicles, and searched the homes, we did not find any weapons. Let's see. We talked about the dog being reunited with the owner soon. We're all looking forward to that as well. The dog's name is Brownie the Brindle. It's a French bulldog. Yeah.
I have one more question.
Do you have the spelling of that, like you did our name?
I don't. I don't.
I knocked on that door in Mesa. The address was in the court documents. We obviously are not releasing it, given that these people were victimized. They were very clearly upset. They were very clearly impacted by these people entering their home when they weren't there and taking their items. Is there anything that they've said to your detectives about the impact of this, and just more broadly, how violating of a crime this is to people?
I'm not immediately aware of any statements that those particular victims made to our detectives, but something they teach us in the police academy, and something that's always definitely stuck with me, is burglary victims. It's one of the worst invasions you can ever feel emotionally, and even if only maybe even a few items are taken from your home, the fact that you know somebody was in your home rummaging around, touching things and going places that you reserve for your family and your friends and people you actually invite into your home, just has that feeling of just violation and just ick, right? And that's one thing that they taught us in the academy, is to make sure that when we go investigate burglary crimes, that we are very sensitive to that with our victims, as sensitive as we can be, to understand that it's an emotional thing because someone was in their home. Someone stole their things. Someone was rummaging through their things. It's definitely something that can be very traumatizing. And obviously, for our detectives, nothing is almost more gratifying than knowing that that is the feeling victims have, to then get these people and arrest them and then hand them off to the county attorney to let justice be done. And that's what we're hoping for in this case. And we're glad that we were able to do that for these victims. I think those were most of the questions and discussion things that had come up prior to this morning. Was there anything else, as we're going to probably kind of wrap up here, that anybody else has a question on, wants to know?
Mesa houses, do we know how long they were actually inside of both of those?
We do have a timestamp on that right now. I'm trying to remember exactly what it was. I believe it was fairly quickly. I mean, enough time, as it was described in those court documents, that the areas they were in were a bit ransacked and gone over, but it wasn't terribly long, if I remember correctly. I'm not sure you can even shout out a time frame or not, but not very long. And that's typical of this type of group, of this type of activity, is they go right for where they think the most valuable things will be. They get into it and try to get out of there as quick as possible, because they know if anybody saw them or there is any kind of silent alarm, that they're basically on the clock for that. And so they want to try to get in and get out and get as much as they can.
How did they enter both houses?
Through the rear yard, and I believe one case was through a sliding door, and one case was through a window.
Do you know when the group entered the U.S. and how long they've been in the country?
That's the one thing that we don't know. We don't know where and when they entered the U.S. And again, just some of the activity going on in Washington, Oregon, and California before they landed here.
Months, weeks of those other burglaries?
I don't think we have any information on that right now. Tom, I think you had one more question.
Do you know if those doors and windows were locked or unlocked that they entered through?
I believe I recall reading that was forced entry in both instances. Yeah.
Just got one more. Reading the Burbank press release, it says that they're going to take their findings and forward them to their district attorney. How does that work moving forward?
Well, for us, as far as the police department goes, obviously we're going to work as collaboratively with them as they were nice enough to tip us off that this group was en route. So any resources that they need or any additional information that we can provide to them, from the Scottsdale Police Department to the Burbank Police Department, our detective groups will obviously work together with them to help any way that we can. You know, one of the things that we had discussed with my investigative group was, you know, there was a lot of evidence and things recovered, and so I think they're still sort of sorting through some of that. But I think with this group now in custody, I think it was able to help validate some of the crimes that Burbank was already investigating, and that's why in their news release they were able to then say, sort of now, that they will be forwarding some of their case information to their county attorney in Los Angeles there.
So there's a possibility of extradition? I mean,
I mean, I don't think anybody here is going to stand in the way of that once they're done doing whatever they need to do here. Yeah. Everybody good? I think so. Thank you so much. That was great. We're going to get out of here just a little early, I think, but that's terrific. Thank you all again for being here. Any other information that you need, please email the Scottsdale PIO group at pio@scottsdaleaz.gov. Thank you.